this morning calling attention to what we're here for, our gathering, what's the purpose of it. And I'm going to use the number one analogy in the Bible, the most frequently used analogy in the Bible to describe our redemption, and it's the tree. Look for a tree in the Bible, and the story of our salvation always changes one way or the other. The story of God's generosity is first depicted in saying you can eat from any fruit of the tree. Then there's the forbidden tree, and then the first act of sin occurred at a tree. And then the curse of man is to be eating from the fruit of the ground by the sweat of our brow. Then, throughout the rest of the Bible, look for anything associated with trees, or wood, or fruits, or vines, or leaves, or stumps, or branches. Somebody said in John 15, I am the vine and you're the branches. That's a clue. Isaac put a tree on his back on the way to being sacrificed on the third day. Does that remind you of anybody? In the Gospels, Jesus put the tree on his back, the cross, and all the writers of the New Testament call it not a cross, but a tree. But I want to take us back to the first tree and then to the New Testament just for a moment. If I said to you, where are you? What would I be doing? If I said, where are you? What am I doing? I'm looking for you, right? Where are you? I'm searching, right? That's the question that God posed to who? Adam. Where was he? He was hiding in a fruit tree. When he heard the sound of the Lord, what did he do? He ran and hid in the trees, and those trees spoken about are fruit trees. Did that question ever be answered? Yes. It's answered in the New Testament. God was walking in the garden in Genesis 3, and they heard the sound of his voice. The narrative in Luke 19 picks up that same phrase. Jesus is walking, and he finds someone where? He finds a guy named Zacchaeus. Adam was a thief. He took what was not his. Zacchaeus was a thief. He took what was not his. And where did Jesus find him? Up in a fig tree. And Jesus said to him, what? Today I must come to your house. Why? Because God is always looking for people to come back to him who have run away and maybe are hiding in goodness. A form of God's goodness. You might be hiding in your marriage. You might be hiding in your education. You might be hiding in your family or hiding in your kids. And God comes saying, where are you? Is he doing that today? At the end of the story in Luke 19:10, Luke wraps it up, takes us back to Genesis 3 and says, the Son of Man has come to what? Seek. That's what God was doing in Genesis 3. To seek and to save who? That which was lost. You might be lost in a fruit tree, lost in your vocation, and Jesus comes and says, I'm looking for you. Today is gathered together all of the scriptures, all the readings, the teachings, to say God's looking for you. I pray that you'll say yes to Jesus. Zacchaeus did, and the proof of his repentance, he says, everything I've ripped off, I'm going to pay back. There's hope for those who have run away from God. If you're one of them, hear the call, come back. Let's pray. Thank you, God, that you don't ignore us. And once we leave you, for whatever reason, you don't say to us, goodbye and good riddance. You say, I'm looking for you. I'm searching for you. You're mine. You belong with me. And when you come to our home, like Zacchaeus, we become children of Abraham, sons and daughters of the promise with a great future in front of us. There's people here, I'm sure, today who have wandered from you. Whatever reason, I pray that today they hear you and not run away, but they run to you like Zacchaeus, up a tree to meet Jesus. May that happen all over the world, every state in this country, every land, every place where people meet, whether it's in a cathedral or under a tree or by a riverbank. Let it happen for the sake of your gospel, and I pray it in Jesus' mighty name. Everyone say right on. Right on. Time to worship, folks. Let's do it. She does a tremendous job in putting things together to prepare us to meet the Lord. So give it up for Mary, would you, right now? And then have a seat. Thank you, team. Thank you, Mary. I want to make sure we have a few kids left. here in our group because you are now on deck, kids. Last week, we had an exercise where the kids were involved. As I mentioned, each episode in the Gospels is like a jigsaw puzzle. Every piece fits with the previous one and fits with the next one. It's wrong to read Bible passages by themselves. You are sure to misinterpret them. Everything is written in context. Luke is like a big puzzle, and every story contributes a piece. Last week, I read the story of the demoniac in Luke's Gospel, chapter 8, and the kids were asked to shout out loud when they saw an idea or a word that was repeated from the previous story. And they did a great job, didn't they? You remember that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, this is a little tougher, kids. I'm going to we're going to ratchet it up just a little bit. So have your Bible for a minute. And in a few minutes, I'm going to read the text that I'm going to be expounding. By the way, Zach and Kayla are at our home with sick kids today. So unfortunately, you're stuck with me. But one of their daughters is with us here today from Ireland, Northern Ireland, and it's Fiona right down here. I say hi, Fiona. You have to trust me. She's there. Chair's a little high. Lucky Fiona's good to have you. So I'm going to be reading this passage from Luke 8, 40 to 56. But I want you to read the passage we went over last week. I want you to read it by yourself right now. So open your Bible. If you have one, if you don't, forgive me. Maybe a neighbor might share. What a novel idea, share. And why don't you read the story of the demoniac, which is going to be in Luke chapter 8, verse 26. Kids especially, read it carefully through verse 39. So read it right now real carefully. We'll have a few minutes of silence. Don't be upset about that. Kids, observe real quickly. 8, 26 to 39. Read it. And look for the important words. Look for the important verbs and nouns. Lock them into your mind. Then in a minute, we'll read the next story. When you're done, just kind of signal by looking up here or saying, I'm done. Something like that. Either way is acceptable. So that's 26 to 39 in Luke 8. You read by yourself. Anybody done? Raise your hand if you're done. Anybody still need a minute? Raise your hand if you still need a minute. We'll wait. Again, I'm going to be reading the next story, and I want the kids to follow when they see a word that's repeated. Luke did it on purpose. He puts threads in stories so that you keep track of it. Are we all done? All right, I'm going to read the next story, and we stand as we read. And all the kids, visitors, guests, members alike, I want you to say double play when you see a word that's repeated, not words like the or it or and or cause, but important words. Important words that you saw in the previous story. If they're repeated in this story, say double play. All right, let's stand to read. Now, if you consider yourself a kid, that's cool too. You can say double play. Double means the word has been doubled. The word has been repeated. Verse 40. Now when Jesus returned from the other side, a crowd welcomed him. See how different that is? What happened in the previous story? The previous crowd told him to leave. This crowd welcomes him. For they were all expecting him. Just then a man named Jarius. Okay, you're supposed to say double play. Where do we see that phrase used in the previous story? There was a man, and he said his name was Legion. The word name is important. We are not told people's names without reason. There was a man named Jarius, a ruler of the synagogue. And he came and fell at Jesus' feet. Double play. Yes. What did the demoniac do? He fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house.
Double play.
Yes, thank you. Because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had a river of blood running for 12 years. But no one could heal her. She had spent all her livelihood, and all she did was get worse. And she came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. And instantaneously, the river of blood stopped. He asked, "Who touched me?" And the whole crowd denied. And then Peter pipes in. This is unusual. In the previous passage, none of the disciples are even mentioned. They're on the bench because they have failed in the previous story. Jesus has put them on the bench. They're not in the game. Finally, we hear from Peter. And Peter said, "Master, the crowd is crowding you and crushing you, pressing against you." In other words, Jesus, what a dumb question. Who touched me? But Jesus said for the second time, "Who touched me?" I know that power has flowed out from me. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came in fear, trembling, and fell at his feet. Second person that falls at Jesus' feet. And how she had been instantaneously healed, and how the river of blood had stopped. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you." Luke uses the word save all kinds of different ways. Go your way in shalom, in peace. And while Jesus was still speaking, that's Luke's way of telling us, don't forget that story that I just told you about this woman. It's to be connected to this story right here. While Jesus was still talking, someone from the house of Jarius, the synagogue group, came, and they said, "Your daughter has expired. She's dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore." And when Jesus heard this, he said to Jarius, "Don't be scared. Only believe, and and she will be saved. And when he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except the 3 inner disciples. He always takes them to key places in his ministry. He took them to the Mount of Transfiguration. He took them to the Garden of Gethsemane. And he takes it here where he's going to raise them from the dead. But he cleared everybody else out. Just like Peter cleared everybody out when he raised Tabitha from the dead. And the child's father and mother, literally it says, the child's parents. And meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning. You hire professional mourners to come in and do the funeral thing. This is not their first rodeo. And they were there to wail. I've heard Middle Eastern women and men wailing, and it's quite a sound. I mean, it's shocking, in fact, to Western ears. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She's not dead, but asleep. Sounds like a really cruel joke, doesn't it? But this is not time for a joke. They laughed at him. Actually, they said they mocked him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, Talitha, cum. It's the same words almost that Peter said to Tabitha. Talitha, cum. Little girl, rise. And her spirit came back, returned to the body. And at once she stood up. And then he ordered them to give her a happy meal. Her parents were astonished. But he ordered them not to tell anybody what had happened. Here ends the reading. What do you see between the 2 stories? What connections are there in your mind from last week to this story? What connections are there?
Jesus commanding the spirits for the believer to come back.
That's right. We have spirits being expelled, and in this story, the spirit comes back, right? Great. Good job. What else?
They were both made well.
They were both made well. Exactly. Right. What else?
They were both given their life back.
That's right.
They were told how to present their story, like one was told to be quiet and one was told to tell.
That's right. Great observation. One more. One more connection between these 2 stories.
They both fell at Jesus' feet.
They did. Yes, great job. Well done. All right, let's have a seat. Pray for a second, and then we'll take a journey today. Thank you, loving Father, that you have not given us your word to confuse us, although sometimes we're confused. You've given us your word to express yourself, to talk about yourself, and you do that through the person of your Son, called the Son of God. We have much to learn. Today, Lord, we may step on some toes. You may step on some toes. You also may touch someone who feels a sense of desperation, like the woman. We also have people here, perhaps, who are like Jarius, who's well-heeled, influential, powerful, but needed a boost, needed a jump start, needed jumper cables on his battery, and he got it from a woman. If there's men here, Lord, with attitudes that are derogatory and degrading about women and their faith, pray that today you'd help them to see that Jesus would not agree with that viewpoint. Band us together, Lord, to Christ our glory, that we just rehearsed in song. And as a result of our time together, I pray that all of us would be incredibly encouraged, our faith boosted, hope for tomorrow, a greater love for you and for one another. We pray for Jesus' sake. I recently read a controversial book. I like controversial books, especially if they're written by frustrated women. I like those books. There's a lot of feminists out there who are frustrated, and I say they have a lot of good points. And the church is far too long did this to them. The book is called Who Cooked the Last Supper? It's a great title, isn't it? Who Cooked the Last Supper? It's a little girl who, growing up in class, studying history, reading history books, said, hey, we're all women in history. But as Edward Gibbon, who wrote The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, said, when you read history, history is basically a story of the stupidity of men. That's a paraphrase. And so she said, I wanted to write a book that says that women have a place in history. They made a difference in history. They should not be ignored. There's some great women who did some great things. And I agree with her. I'm not sure who cooked the Last Supper. But Luke is one that you cannot lay that charge at. You can't lay the charge at Luke's feet that he ignored women. In fact, every time he talks about a man, in the next story he talks about a woman. So it's balanced. Luke has this elevated view of women that his first century cohorts doesn't share, and often today does not share as well. But Luke brings us men and women together. And today's story is a little bit of a shocker, and if it steps on your toes, consider God's love on your toes today. He's going to tell us about a man and a woman. Jarius, the synagogue ruler. Elite, top of the pile, influential, powerful. Admired. Who's desperate? Because he has a daughter. A 12-year-old daughter. Like a flower, just ready to bloom. Ready to unfurl like a flower. And then we have a woman at the bottom of the pile. She's destitute. She's poor. She's shunned because she's unclean with the flow of blood. She can't get married. She can't have kids. No one can touch her. In a society that's built on family, she carried a lot of wounds from being rejected. And it's her who's the hero of the story. And it's her that gives hope to this powerful man. That's the story. I could close right now and say, let's do whatever we're going to do next. But I probably ought to show you from the text. Once again, it's the story of a weak, poor, destitute woman who covertly comes behind Jesus. And Luke arranges the story to show us that she was the one that God used to bring hope to a powerful man. Let's read that. And when he returned, Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him. That's a real contrast from the previous story. The demoniac told him to leave when he first came, and then the crowd, the people from the city of the Gerasenes, told Jesus to leave. This is a real contrast, but don't get any ideas. Luke is never impressed with enthusiastic crowds. Luke is never impressed with big numbers of people who are going, yay for Jesus! His view of them is, but his view of this poor woman is. So, he returned, and the crowd was welcomed him, and they were all expecting him. And look, that's Luke's way of saying, hey, pay attention. If you're kind of daydreaming over there, woo, bring your camera back. Look, there was a man, and his name was Jarius, and he was a top dog. He was the big daddy. He was the big daddy of the synagogue. He's the one who ran the synagogue, man. Right? What a contrast. The woman is not allowed to run the synagogue. She has a flow of blood. She would touch people. Anybody she touches, they become unclean. If she sat in that stool, you couldn't sit in that stool because you could get unclean. So she's a woman that you shun. And he fell at the feet of Jesus. And he urged him to come to his house. Jesus told the demoniac at the end of the story to what? Go to his house and tell everything that God had done. This man wants Jesus to come to his house because his daughter, his only daughter. You have a daughter? You have daughters? You love your daughters? You would do anything for your daughters. You would do anything for your daughter. Anybody who has stayed up late with a daughter, a sick daughter, a wounded daughter, knows the feelings of this dad. His only daughter was about 12, and she was about to die. In fact, Luke uses the imperfect tense here, which means that she was in the process of dying. She was just moving steadily towards death's door. It wouldn't be long. So he's desperate. Think of this, a synagogue ruler falling at the feet of Jesus. Are you serious? You realize what kind of trouble he would get in for doing that? I mean, he would have a peck of trouble from the rabbis. We heard you went to Jesus. Can you explain yourself? I want to go into that conversation that he had with his wife back home, don't you, for a minute? He's probably his wife. He said, you know what? Nobody else around here can heal our daughter. I heard about this, Jesus. Why don't you go? I'll stay with her. Ah, are you kidding me? I get in trouble. I lose my job and our pension and our health benefits with Blue Cross and Blue Shield. We don't want to do that. Go. Okay, I'll go. He goes. And so, he was going, and as he went, the crowd was crushing him. Luke takes us into the scene where we see this huge crowd, and they're just crushing him. The word, in fact, is used to crush grapes. I mean, it's smash. They're smashing Jesus. And a woman with a river of blood. And she had it for 12 years. Obviously, there's a connection. 12-year-old daughter, 12 years of suffering. All right? This is a woman's problem, and I'm going to be sensitive here. But she's got some uterine hemorrhaging. If you are hemorrhaging for 12 years as a woman, what are you? You're anemic, you're weak, you're discouraged, and it says that she had spent all her livelihood. She cleared out her savings, she maxed out her credit cards, she has no money left, and she's shunned. Not allowed to get married, not allowed to have kids, not even allowed to carry a little baby, a little child, like maybe a niece or a nephew or someone else's baby. So she is alone. And it says that she had spent all her livelihood and she was not strengthened and no one could heal her. And she came up behind him covertly, under the radar, and touched the tassel or the edge of his clothing. And instantly, the flow of blood, the river of blood, stood still. It's a remarkable scene. Like, Jesus gets touched and the blood stops. The blood answers to Jesus' call. The wind did. Remember, the wind stood still. The waves stood still at his call. And now blood stops. And that's authority. That's power. This is the new Adam. And Jesus said, who touched me? And everyone was denying. And Peter pipes in, Master, the crowd is jostling you and pressing you. In other words, what do you mean, who touched you? But do you see the irony? How much power went out of Jesus when the crowd touched him? None. You can have enthusiastic people for Jesus. They love Jesus. But there's no faith. There's just entertainment. There's lights, there's smoke, there's yay for Jesus. And no power leaves Jesus. The only time Jesus said power left me is what? When this woman touched him. It's the touch of faith that he's looking for. Who touched me? For I felt power leaving me. And Peter pipes in and says, come on, Jesus, the crowd is crushing you. How could you say that? And Jesus said, I know someone touched me. His power has escaped me. And when the woman saw that she could not escape attention, Trembling, she came forward, fell before him, and explained that she was the one who touched him, explaining how the blood stopped in front of everybody. But the word everybody is the word laos. It always refers to the people of Israel, not Gentiles. In this case, who would be listening to her story? Jarius. Jarius would be listening to this story. Did he need to hear this story? Yes, because the embassy that's coming from his house is going to tell him what? Just give up. She's dead. There's more clues here. And she told how she had been healed. And the flow of blood had stopped instantaneously. And Jesus said to her, what do you call her? Daughter. Why? Why did he say to her daughter in front of Jarius? Because we're dealing with Jairus' daughter. And he says to her daughter, don't be scared. Or, excuse me, he says to Jairus, don't be scared, only believe. See what Jesus is doing? He forced this woman to tell her story. He forced the woman, in a sense, to tell her story of what happened. How she touched Jesus. Because there's a man listening who's desperate, and he's going to receive bad news. Do you see Luke's view of women? You see Luke's view of women? We have a rich, powerful man who's desperate. And he's going to hear some bad news, but he brings a woman who's poor, destitute, shunned by society, and who has touched Jesus and been healed. And her story is the means by which Jarius keeps going. Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Jesus perceived the difference between the touch of faith and the crush of the crowd. He always knows the difference between the enthusiasm of the crowd and the person in the crowd who really is a believer and who really touches by faith. He can discern the difference. No one was healed in the crowd, even though they touched Jesus. You know, closeness to Jesus doesn't do the trick. Being associated with Jesus doesn't do the trick. Knowing about Jesus doesn't do the trick. Welcoming Jesus, excited about Jesus doesn't do the trick. He's not looking for that. What is he looking for? He's looking for faith in him. That little touch of faith. And it didn't even touch him. It touched his clothing. It's a powerful of faith. So, here's the aftermath. While he was still speaking, the embassy came from the house of Jarius. And they said, your daughter is dead. No longer hassle the teacher. And Jesus, when he heard this, he answered and said, don't fear, only believe, and she will be saved. And so they came to the house. And he did not allow anybody in except Peter and John and Jacob, literally, and the father of the child and his mother. And the mourners were weeping. And he said, don't cry, for she's not dead. She's only sleeping. And they mocked him, ridiculed him, knowing that she had died. Why is he telling us this? Why is Luke adding this comment? Well, Luke is always concerned about having enough witnesses in the story to prove the facts. Who here can confirm the facts that the child is really, really, really dead? The professional mourners. This is not their first rodeo. They know when someone's dead, so that's why they laughed at him. Who else is going to testify that this girl is really dead? Her parents. Who in the story would best know if the child was alive or dead? Mom and Dad. And that's why they're there. In the presence of 2 or 3 witnesses, every matter is established. Luke is going out of his way to tell us this girl really died. She was not unconscious. She was not having a sleep dream. She was not swooning. She was dead. I'm having a little trouble saying that, so just for the bad glasses I had on and the bad light. He took her by the hand. He took her by the hand. And he said to her, he spoke to her, little girl, arise. And her spirit returned. And she got up immediately. And he ordered her to give her something to eat. And his parents were astonished. And he ordered them not to tell anybody what had happened. What's the point of the story? What's happening? What Luke's doing is how we would phrase it. Luke is showing us, first of all, that Jesus can tell the difference between the touch of faith and the crush of all the enthusiastic crowd. He knows who believes, and he knows who's there just for the party. He knows the difference. And the surprise is that the only person in the crowd who's actually believing that day is a woman you would never expect. A poor, shunned woman who's been bleeding. Physically weak, spiritually strong. Secondly, he's telling us in the second part of the passage, in the story of Jarius going home, is that the boost that he got from her testimony and from her story is what kept him going and brought Jesus to her house. Jarius could have said, Jesus, forget it. I've just been told she's dead. You don't need to come. But the woman's story kept him going. Have you ever had a woman keep you going when you wanted to quit? Are there women in your life who have been there brought by God's goodness and providence, who have been the means of your redemption and your salvation? Have you thought about that? Maybe it's time for some takeaways. Let me suggest a few that you might be able to put in your pocket and go home with today. The first thing that comes to my mind is something that all of you parents are going to have to do. Your kids are small, and one day their grandparents are probably going to die. Maybe an uncle or aunt dies. Maybe even someone younger than that. How do you explain death? Well, the Bible gives us an analogy that you experience every single day of your life. It's called sleep. So sit down with your child, and as they anticipate the death of a grandparent, the death of a family member or a friend, say, you know, you go to sleep every night. But when you go to sleep, it's not the end, is it? Because if you go to sleep, what happens in the morning? You wake up. Death is sleep. Jesus said that. She's only sleeping. He was right. He was right. The girl is only sleeping. See, God has built witnesses into our life every day that remind us of eternal truths. One of them is sleep. The other is trees, by the way, fruit trees. But I'm going to get off on that. I don't need to. Use that platform of sleep to talk about the meaning of death. It gives them hope. It shows that, yes, we die, but that's not the end. There's another story. We're going to get up one day. And who's going to wake us up? The voice of Jesus. Remember? John's Gospel, chapter 5. Remember what he said in John chapter 5? The day is coming when the dead who are in the grave shall hear the voice of the Son of God, and they who hear shall what? Live! One day, all those people who have died will hear the voice of Jesus. Just like this little girl heard the voice of Jesus. And what happens? The body is returned with the Spirit. And we have life, resurrection life. Secondly, one important thing. Do the epistles supplement this or affirm what I'm saying? What did Paul say in 1 Thessalonians 4:13? He said, I do not want you to be ignorant or to grieve like those who what? Who sleep. What's he talking about? People in the nursery? No. He's talking about people who have died before the return of Christ. Sleep is a form of death. Death is a form of sleep. Secondly, you may not be very important in the world. Most of us are not. You know, most of us, when we die, no one's going to care. We pass through life unknown. You may feel that way. I'm a nobody, nobody sees me, nobody pays attention to me, no one knows my name. But this passage is so encouraging because it tells us that if you are reaching out to Jesus, regardless of how poor you are, shunned, physically weak you are, ignored, hated, if you reach out to Jesus by faith, he feels your touch, he recognizes that touch, and he will respond to you. There's no one here that he does not listen to carefully when you reach out with that end of faith. You may not even be a very good Christian. You know, you may feel that you're at the bottom of the pile, but God still listens to you. You may be far away from Jesus, but if you have faith, he will listen to your touch of faith. He will. He can tell the difference between the crowd and that little girl, that little woman, that little man, that ignored person says, help me, just with that touch. Even if it was just the fingernail that you used to touch Jesus, he'll hear it. Be encouraged by Jesus' discernment of your faith. The third one I'm going to overlook. Faith is not superstition. It's personal. It's genuine. I don't know if we're struggling here at all with superstitions and putting our faith in relics. I don't think that we need to probably go down that road. But I do want to go to number 4. Tell your story. Have you ever told your story of what Jesus has done for you? What happened because this woman told her story and was forced to tell her story by Jesus? What happened? A stranger heard her and found hope. Tell your story because there's people out there who need hope. There's people out there who need to hear what God did for you. When you're wondering if he pays attention to you, you'll look at her story and realize, oh, I need to tell my story too. What has God done for you? Have you put it together in a couple of paragraphs, 3 or 4 paragraphs? Are you willing to share your story? People can argue doctrine all day long, and they can fuss at you because of what you believe. But they can't argue with your story. You've got a story to tell. It's the only one. Speak it. Someone might be listening who needs to hear it. And if you're a woman, there may be a man who needs to hear your story. And finally, I end with the place where I began. Is there a woman behind you that you've ignored? Is there a woman in your life that you've ridiculed, thought less of? Well, women, they don't know anything about the Bible. It's men who know everything about Jesus. I say, yeah, what about this story? Is there a woman that you've ignored? Maybe today, God would say to you, pay attention to the women that God has placed in your life. The women of faith. Realize, you parents, that your wife, your mother, the mother of your children, is very, very strategic for the faith of your children. They watch her. They watch her in the time of storms, the valleys, the mountains. They pick up a lot from mom, maybe more than you. It would be time for us to value them and to validate their presence, to validate their story, their teaching skills, their understanding of God. And I hope, and I sense that right here at Redeemer, we have some women of very, very strong faith. And we are richer and better because they're here. And we learn from them. I'm a better person because I've listened to women. I hope that you will adopt the same attitude, that you'll be a better person if you listen to women in your life. Women teachers. They know a lot and they have great faith. They may not be very much in people's eyes. They won't be on the front of the Cosmopolitan magazine. Like this woman never made it on the cover of any magazine, except Poor Illustrated. But she's a hero. She's Luke's hero. She's one of my heroes. G. Campbell Morgan was the teaching pastor of Westminster Chapel in London for many years during the war years. His firstborn daughter died when she was just a small girl. He wrote, I can hardly speak of this matter without becoming personal and reminiscent, remembering a time 40 years ago when our little lassie lay at the point of death, dying. And I called for Jesus then, and he came and he said to our troubled hearts, fear not, only believe. He did not say she will be made whole. And she was not made whole on the earthly plane. She passed away into the life beyond. But he did say to her, Talitha Kumi, little lamb, little girl, arise. But in her case, that did not mean stay on earth. It meant that he needed her. And he took her to be with himself. And she's been with him all those years. All those years, and we miss her every day. But his word, only believe, has been the strength. Has been the strength of our passing years. How appropriate to conclude with the words of Jesus. Only believe. Thank you for listening. Would you stand as we prepare to respond? Let's pray together as a family, a church family. Lord, you're a God that surprises. You surprise us with the giants that we've ignored, the giants of faith standing in front of us or behind us. And we've missed them because we're impressed by the big crowds, and you're not. We're impressed by noise, and you're not. You're impressed by the touch of faith. That's what moves mountains and cures rivers of blood. It's the touch of faith that we long to be able to exercise, that each one of us can practice in our daily rhythm of life. Strengthen, therefore, our faith and our appreciation of the women that you've placed in our life. Let us not mock them or degrade them or belittle them, but honor them, validate them, and tell them how much they mean to us and to our journey. Thank you for the women you've brought to Redeemer. They make us who we are. They're strong. We admire them, we love them, and we want to learn from them in a fresh way. Do that today, and pray that all the women who make up this congregation, even our guests and our visitors, would realize what value they have in the body of Christ, that they are worth much, and that you look at them with incredible love and expectation. Use all the women in our congregation greatly, wherever they live, wherever they work, in their families, in their workplaces, in their neighborhoods, wherever they go. Use them like this one for your glory, we pray. Through Christ our Lord. Christ our glory. Celebrate.